Good evening, everyone, and welcome to ELJ Edition's Be Well reading series. I'm your host for this evening, Nicole Tallman, and we have the honor of having three amazing featured poets with us tonight to celebrate Women's History Month. So just to give you a quick run of show, I'm going to ask each of our three featured poets to read for about 15 minutes. And we will reserve just a little bit of time at the end for audience Q&A. So be thinking of questions you might want to ask. But if you don't have any, that's okay too. I can ask a few questions. You can pop your questions in the chat, or you can just save them for the end. I'm just going to ask everyone, if you are not reading, to please mute yourself so that we can reduce background noise. And just be cognizant of the fact that we are recording. So just please try not to interrupt poets while they are reading, okay? That's all I've got for ground rules. We'll just all be very respectful to each other. And we got a couple more people here in the waiting room, so let me let them in. And then we will go to our first reader. All right, perfect. So I'm going to start out with Suzanne, our first reader tonight. Suzanne Frischkorn is a Cuban American poet. Her most recent collection is Fixed Star, a Forward Indies Book of the Year Award finalist. She's the recipient of the Writers Center Emerging Writers Fellowship for her book Lit Windowpane, the Aldrich Poetry Award for her chapbook Springtide, selected by Mary Oliver, an Individual Artist Fellowship from the Connecticut Commission on Culture and Tourism, and a 2023 Swim Residency Award at the Betsy. She is an editor at Currency and serves on the Train.org editorial board. And her fourth book of poems, Whipsaw, is forthcoming in 2024 from Anhinga Press. What month is that, Suzanne?
April 10th.
Okay, so very soon during Poetry Month, I'm going to pop a link into the chat for Suzanne's book, and she also has a code for free shipping. So I'll pop that in there too. Okay, so if you want a copy of Whipsaw, I'll pop that in the chat. Everyone, let's give a warm welcome to Suzanne Frischkorn.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me, Nicole. I'm really looking forward to reading with Lynne and Eugenia. I'm going to be reading poems from Whipsaw, which is coming out, as you said, in April. And I'm going to begin with a poem that I wrote right after the 2016 election results. Dear America, it's time to teach my daughter how to shoot an arrow, how to use a knife, how to hit the center of a target. It's bloody work, but she should know. It's time to teach her how to win a debate while applying lipstick without a mirror, and how to hold her keys between her fingers in a parking lot. It's time for her to hit the weight room, join the cross-country team, cast a spell literally and figuratively, and it's time for her to develop telekinesis and clairvoyance. It's time she knows to never leave her drink unattended, never drink on an empty stomach, never drink before her period. And maybe what I mean to say is never drink alcohol, period. It's time to learn that one day she might switch grocery stores because a guy on staff there gives her the creeps. And even if it's less convenient to travel across town, it's always best to trust her intuition. It's time to teach her that when a grown man stares at her new breasts, she is not the one who should feel ashamed. America, she's her mother's daughter. She's got this. This next poem that I'm going to read mentions Jeffrey Epstein, and it's called, that's the only thing you need to know. Museum Mile, New York City. All the women wear summer dresses, and men play ping pong in Bryant Park. Sun and sky in harmony. We forget it's all dire. It's the morning the sex trafficker pedophile is found dead in his cell. Perhaps that's why the city has all its outdoor umbrellas up and everyone dines outside. Beauty so bright, I wear sunglasses. I wrap my denim jacket around my waist and leave my own prison. No service. All I can do is let sun kiss my skin and believe every day on the Upper East Side must be this fine. Later, when I see a dog sitting across his owner on the train, I smile because who wouldn't? The next poem I'm reading, I resisted writing about the mass shootings for many, many years because it was literally something that was happening too close to home. Sandy Hook was about 15 minutes from where I lived, and my daughter was in first grade at the time. But a few years back, I felt compelled to write this poem after the El Paso shooting, and it's called Backcountry. The shooter was white. We live in a verdant forest, 20 minutes from everything. Summer's leaves screen the road, every sunrise caught and cradled in branches. Our perimeter lined with stacked stoned walls. When it all finally goes to shit, that's something anyway, not being an easy target. The shooter was a loner. The shooter didn't talk to anyone. He was in his 20s, wrote a manifesto, streamed his shooting live. His mother bought the guns. He graduated from the high school. No one would fuck him. No one raised him that way. No one followed up. No one can believe it happened. They never thought it would happen here. At the carnival, the strangest of places to escape news, colored lights corral the dusk. Dark clouds speed towards us. Lightning flickers sky. We gather our children and drive home. It's a very cheerful book. I don't know if anybody's noticed. Very happy book. For some reason, can I move Nicole? No.
What happened?
Your your little box for some reason is right in front of my manuscript
My box? Oh,
on my screen.
that's so weird.
No, it's very strange. And now, of course, I lost.
You could take it out of speaker gallery mode if it's bothering you. If you click on in the right corner, do you see where it says view? You can change it.
Okay, I'm sorry to.
No, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Make yourself comfortable.
I don't. Oh, view here. Wow, look at this wonderful crowd. I didn't see you guys before. Let's try again. All right, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm just gonna move it over. It's been okay. Here we go. So when I was living in Connecticut, I recently moved to New York, but I lived in Connecticut for a very long time. Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones had his Connecticut estate like about 15 minutes from where I lived. And one of the things we shared was a forest. We did not live on an estate. We lived in a converted cow barn. But I wrote this poem after reading his autobiography called Life. Keith Richards, I was with you. I was with you, Keith Richards, even as you rhapsodized about those sweet honeys who fed you and warmed you on the road with their soft bodies. Those were different times, and I forgive you. Keith Richards, I believe you about Mick Jagger. Front men always get ahead of themselves. Keith Richards, I too only ingested high quality pharmaceutical grade Coke and wouldn't touch what passes for euphoria on the streets today. Keith Richards, I was with you like a friend as you presented the best version of Keith. May I call you Keith? I was with you all the way until you opened your garden gate and stepped into my primeval forest, that happy hunting ground of the Iroquois, that old Indian burial ground turned nature preserve backing up to your house. I was with you, Keith Richards, in the deep lake and the waterfall. Keith Richards, I stood apart from you and George when you decided to catch fish named Oscars, so big and so tasty. I was off to the side when instead you caught the mythical snapping turtle, often spoken of, seldom seen, green and slimy. It lumbers out of the lake with your fish, a prehistoric creature, its mouth about to pop and snap. You drop your rod, pick up a rock, and crack the turtle on its shell. It sinks into the lake, immense, ancient, last seen by the Iroquois. And that is where I left you, Keith Richards. A lot of this book began with the results of the election and ends with like the echoes of the 2020 riots. So a lot of this was inspired with what was going on in America at that time between those years, between 2016 and 2020. And this next poem is called Cops, but it's cops as in a stand of trees and not police officers. When Congress slipped a note to sell off federal lands, to deforest, to develop, and to cut enlightenment from the American landscape, I began to memorize definitions for the words copse, gully, rill, rivulet, orchard, maple, oak, linden. A place in Antarctica hoards every seed on this planet underground for the apocalypse. Last night, a tree fell in the windstorm. The crack sounded like a split in the universe. It fell in the road and blocked traffic like a protest. This morning, the town came and ground it down to stump. It's still windy. The trees sway outside my windows, rendering their own march, waving, waving, we are here. We are over here. Let's go to the end. My daughter is featured in quite a bit of these poems. She was very excited when she saw the dedication. She couldn't believe it because she's the youngest. Half light. The first bright sun of the year, and I am unable to face it. Sunlight glitters in gutter streams and thins snowbanks just enough to reveal their entrails, decayed leaves, blackened branches. By afternoon, the sun is unable to break through the clouds. As we leave to pick up my son, my daughter catches snowflakes on her tongue. In the backyard, a woodpecker coaxes a beetle out of the pine bark. Sometimes no amount of burrowing will suffice. February, the month where giving into dormancy is most seductive. It feels farthest from spring. I remind myself the earthworms are busy aerating the soil, and the dormancy is a form of conservation. I remind myself to pick up my son, to go to the bank, the post office, the market. These small trips, daily and ordinary, get me through the longest month. The afternoons hush, interrupted by snowplow and small children running through the house, fills in the night. I wake up before dawn to find our neighborhood buffed in silence, its hard edges softened. With sunrise comes the rhythmic scrape of shovels against pavement. The snow appears brighter in the half light. The wind tosses up sparkling motes. I wrote one of these poems during the shutdown when we were all very curious about our neighbors and what they were doing. Like, what is our neighbor doing? What is happening over there? We're all shut down. And now I'm looking for it. For some reason, it's a new book. Well, I guess I'm not going to read that one for you. I can't seem to find it in this digital copy. So I will go directly to my poem called Doe. Oh, I did find it. It was right before that one. Okay, let's read that one. To breathe it would choke you. The fire outside my window burns all afternoon. Thick white smoke curls up through the trees. What is our neighbor burning? My body is heavy now. The hard-won posture slumps in a chair. On the desk, a lamp, brushed nickel with parallel coil springs. The black cord trails behind. Its spotlight shines away from me. Outside my window, the forest understory, a new green. This week, tree buds unfurl, and today fire blazes. Flames 6 feet high, fed by what? Now visible only through the gap of a fallen tree at rest and the stone wall. The smoke curls and curls. To breathe it would choke you. My daughter is singing in her room, the last bird call of the evening. And I'm going to finish up with my Doe poem. Every poet has a Doe poem. Here is mine. Caught between stumble and rise, the doe young, the day entering twilight. We drive north, others south, cars driving home in the corridor of woods. Her struggle to right herself loops like a reel. It was that fey time, how her heart must reel when she realizes she's left forest, the road's vibration like the scrape of metal on teeth for her hooves. Wood scent within reach. She is righting herself. As cars speed past her, speed toward her, in that dangerous time, twilight, the refraction and scatter of sun rays, when the sun slips below horizon, another reel winds in another day. Time of most fatal car accidents. Tired drivers blinded by sun on the road. Her natural grace abandoned her. She favors her left side, the doe in the midst of righting herself. Her eyes on the woods. The fae hold their breath. Sunlight refracts, the sun edges horizon, twilight, and she stumbled. This reel loops and loops all evening. Her leg, the struggle in the road I drove past, tired, heading home. Other cars, other drivers, tired, driving north, driving south. Cars on pavement in a corridor of woods. And she caught in the middle with sun rays and the horizon at twilight. Her heart, my heart, reels. In my rearview mirror, the doe. I drove past the doe after she stumbles, and as the cars rush towards her, and like a reel that breaks, I never learn if she returns to the woods. She is forever caught, half rising, at twilight in the middle of the road. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Let's go to Lynn next. My pressmate. Lynn Lynn Kemen lives in the great Western Catskills of New York. She has a new full-length book of poetry, Shoes for Lucy, published by SCE Press in October of 2023. Her chapbook, More Than a Handful, appeared in 2020. Additionally, she contributes as an interviewer and essay editor for the Blue Mountain Review, a culture-focused journal, and is a member of the Southern Collective Experience. She has been published in Silver Birch Press, The Raven's Perch, Poetica Review, Spill Words, Topical Poetry, Fresh Words, The Ekphrastic Review, Lothlorien Poetry, and the Blue Mountain Review. Lynn is on the board of Bright Hill Press and several other not-for-profit organizations. Please join me in giving Lynn a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm really happy to be reading with my other readers. And I think this is a wonderful month to be reading about women and poetry. My first poem is about Bessie Smith, and Bessie Smith was the highest paid Black entertainer in the country at the time of her life. She composed many of her own songs. And when she sang the blues, she sang of the American Black experience of suffering and joy, of betrayal and courage. She had an extraordinary talent, and she was given the title Empress of the Blues by her fans and peers. Empress of the Blues. Bessie, regal, roosting, smoldering, sensual number, bouquets of flowers, canary overhead, Fabrizi flaunting, 16-piece band belonging only to Bessie. Plutocratic notes, richness, but tabloids, street smack, anagram of cinema and Iceman, desire, Bessie. The second poem, most of the poems that I'm reading tonight are about women artists. The second poem is about Maud Lewis, who was a Canadian artist. She lived from 1903 to 1970, and she lived in incredible poverty until the last 5 years of her life. She's Canadian, and she lived in Nova Scotia. 3 Black Cats. Maud lived in a simple house in a simple way. She was poor, but had great talent as a painter. In the worst nights, she wore a wool cap to bed as she lay next to her husband. 3 black cats piled atop her. They warmed each other and her. Doubtless, they sang her to sleep. Canadian winters were long and dark. Maud painted summer year-round. She loved painting life. Cats were her favorite muses and subjects. She tried painting other cats white and even gray. None brought the same connection as Fluffy and her too. Maud was made of pain, had painful arthritis. It never stopped her from petting those black cats, and the pain never stopped her from painting. Maud often sold her art for a Canadian nickel. Today, her art is famous. That black trio of felines helped make her career as a folk painter. Her reputation and bank account grew due to the popularity of those 3 black cats. My next poem is called Persephone Ponders. And It's based on the Greek myth, but it has a little bit of current events mixed in with it. Persephone peers out without blinking. 6 months marred by darkness, 3 years locked down. Time unkindly tick-tocks differently in all the halls of Hades. Flickers of sinister snickering, the recognition of blossoming, of leafing, the corpse, a contrast, half seen in rings on Zoom. On smart screens, always seen binge watching, on demand, on sea and on land. And Persephone? Her fleeting youth yearns to share food off another's plate, to share a sip of wine, touch lips in between. But winter is harsh, it's complicated. Unnecessary stupidity may be muted, taken off video. She leaves, leaving an avatar to suffer in her place. I think we've all done that, right? It's torturous and tremulous to listen, to endure unenticing voices. Psst, come out, don't stay. Let's play. Embrace me, running free to sway the moon together and dance. Come out, uncloak and unmask, no longer the chained task of Hades. Soft spring brings relief, winter whipped by warmer weather, your lips pressed against new limbs. Suck the soma from those buds and smash nothing. And Hades, he's sitting in solitude, unloved and unpitied. Persephone proceeds with levity. She skirts the scars of drama, ecstatically donning fuzzy socks, no leather skirts, just jammies, Netflix, and chill suspended till next spring, making the best of hell. The next one is called Beth, and this is about my mother. It took me a long time to write this poem. She died in 2011, and I didn't even think about it for about 3 years after that. Beth, everyone thinks my mom is sweet. Mom doesn't smile. No one wrestled with her rages. I did. And I hear how a mother killed her kid. Imagine how a mother maiming, much less murdering. I can, she says it calmly. A young woman in college while World War II went on. Betty became Beth, a different time, a changed person. The war ended, men came home. Women again mothers without work. No princess, she was pissed. Many mothers couldn't mend, they were pissed too, and it still stands undiscussed. Mother meant to be a doctor. The kid nixed even that idea. Father found a career, away 4 nights a week. Mother, Maudlin, at home with me. She always irritated, me with frequent earaches, often to her too much. She bolted my bedroom door from the outside. She banished me behind the bolt. Out of the eye of the storm, Mother calmed. My body ended any idea I'd conceive. Vacant, I gaped when Mother asked for grandchildren. My next poem is about Billie Holiday, jazz singer. She was born in 1915. She died in 1959. An incredibly talented and tormented person. She had alcohol addiction, opium, and heroin addiction. In my solitude, Lady Day in her solitude, threads of gloom ambushed by anguish, transaction of curved and sliced silhouette, essential truths inevitably hurt. Cap it off, blushing shades of pale pearl, a rosy but dull shine, bitter fruit to swallow like despair as she sits here in her chair. Rattle around alone. One is far lonelier in solitude, an invitation to remember better times. time encapsulated, sorted out, and reviewed. And Georgia O'Keeffe, you probably know her for her wonderful paintings. She was married to Alfred Stieglitz, who was a famous photographer, and Paul Strand was his protege. Rebecca Salisbury, who's not in the poem, was Strand's fiancée. The four of them had a very long and very complicated relationship that went on for years and years, and nobody ever really resolved anything. Georgia O'Keeffe paints Paul Strand. Abstraction ties that bind. Strand and Stig's egos, an annual and eternal struggle. Love, hate, push, pull, slot machine, no change, tap, cigarettes, and drama. Solar plexus, chakra red, rearing back to roar, laugh, snort. They nurse nasty hangovers, fidelity, Fidos, friend, talents, tears, tears, brawls. Martha Graham, modern dancer. And the first line is a quote from Martha. Portrait of Martha Graham. Our arms start from the back because they were once wings. Praise for being the mother of modern dance. I am cursed for giving my daughters the Graham knee. I laugh hearing about the Graham pelvis, shoulders and pelvises thrusting, thrusting. The body never lies. Never birthing my own babies. Others claimed me as a parent. Why me? Oh, shy woman like me, shaping so many lives. I'm tiny, a typhoon to reckon with, a tempest. I slap people and storm out. My body has bent in every movement. When are you going to dance? I scream. I worked for a doctor for 26 years, and he was a doctor of dance, and we saw a lot of people with Graham knees. Heard a lot of stories about Martha. And my final poem is called The Best Advice. This was from my grandmother, Jessie Huff-Talon. She was born in the blizzard of 1888, and she died in 1986. The Best Advice. August of 1969, time for me to leave, my first year of college. Hugging my grandmother goodbye, impatient to go, her spine bent, hands swollen, and joints distorted, she slowly lets me go. Just one thing, study hard, choose your friends carefully, and don't forget, more than a handful is sinful. What could she know? A woman who lived in a too small dying hamlet, self-educated, Presbyterian, humble and so uncool. 50 years later, not a single case defies her best advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I got to hear a lot of poems I've never heard you read before, so that was amazing. And I love how you tailored it to Women's History Month. Thank you so much. We have one final magical, amazing reader. Eugenia Leigh is a Korean-American poet and the author of Bianca from Four Way Books and Blood, Sparrows, and Sparrows. Her poems and essays have appeared in numerous publications, including Time, The Atlantic, The Nation, Poetry, Plowshares, Waxwing, and the Best of the Net anthology. The recipient of Poetry Magazine's Best Hoken Prize, as well as awards and fellowships from poets and writers, Kundiman and others. Eugenia received her MFA from Sarah Lawrence College and serves as the poetry editor at the Adroit Journal. Adroit or Adroit? I always get my French and my English confused. Which one is it?
Adroit.
Adroit. It's Adroit in French and it's Adroit in English. Okay. Thank you so much for helping me there. And the Valentine's editor at Honey Literary, which we all love. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone here, please join me in giving Eugenia a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so thankful to be in this space with you all today. Thank you, Nicole, for inviting me, and I'm so excited to be in conversation with Suzanne and Lynne in a bit also for Women's History Month. It's also, I have to say, I think because it's just constantly on my mind, it's a great privilege to be able to gather in a space like this amid an ongoing active genocide that our country is continuing to sustain in Gaza. So I am going to read from my newest collection, Bianca. Um, I'll give you a little bit of background first. It contains my personal history of childhood abuse, domestic violence, parental incarceration. My father was in prison the entire time I was a teenager, and parental deportation. He was eventually deported to Korea, a country he hadn't been to since he was 10 years old, as a way out of prison. And I wrote about some of these topics in my first book, but between my first book and Bianca, there were 9 years and there was a lot of life lived. I got married. I had 2 miscarriages. I gave birth to my son. And I also finally got the privilege of getting a lot of mental health help. And in my mid-30s, I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder and complex PTSD. And even though some of my earliest mental illness breakdowns probably happened in middle school, and this all led me to also realize that mental illness runs in my family as well. So that's just a little bit of context for these poems, and I'll start with the first poem in the book, which is called What I Miss Most About Hell. What I miss most about hell is prayer. I'd pack a plastic bottle with vodka, drive to the crag of my life, the parking lot of a pancake house, and scream. I prayed like everyone I loved was on fire. The bright violet blob I called God would forgive the atrocities roared in ethanol, while I'd shake like a dog demanding answers from the maker of figs. Why the sycamore fruit sweetens only when bruised, the way a fist will ripen a child. This next poem is called Glossolalia. And if you don't know, glossolalia is the fancy term for a Pentecostal practice of speaking in tongues, which is this idea, this like radical Christian idea that it's possible to speak in like a language of heaven where the Holy Spirit kind of overtakes your body, and then you start to utter these in human ears, like nonsensical language that is legible, I guess, to God and to the spirits. This poem has nothing to do with that, but that is the title. Actually, Tracy Brimhall gave me this title, and you know, if Tracy Brimhall gives you a title, you just take it. So, glossolalia. My baby brandishes a wooden knife meant to have a wooden shallot as he hollers his newest word, knife. Look at my son flashing his dagger, jamming it into plush animals. Knife, knife. Look at him, oblivious to the weapons littering his lineage, or, God forbid, possessed by them. Can the babies planted in the dirt of our bodies absorb the torments buried there? My gentle, watchful child wants all the knives, but some days, everywhere blue. The bear blue, the bells blue, the car, the cup, the light. I marvel at my son who marvels at the sky, blue, blue, no matter how gray the bully of clouds. And this is all I want. Look at my son laughing at the rain. Look how he prods the window with his knife, insisting we cut up the storm, demanding the blue back into view. In Bianca, there is a series of poems, 3 poems about bipolar disorder and 3 poems about complex PTSD. And in the PTSD poems, I wanted to capture the experience of what it was like to have a complex PTSD flashback. And in this one, I wanted specifically to capture what it was like to have this flashback as I was in labor with my son. Um, and after he was born, the complex PTSD actually got far worse as, as he was growing up, and I was constantly replaying my childhood as well. So this one is called Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder with Secret Knock. My hand soaked in blood, my head cracked open. I tell the 5-year-old to fetch the phone, the 2-year-old to fetch a towel. My hand, soaked in blood, holds the towel to my head, cracked open. The children, their round eyes, black planets smacked off their orbits. And the hostess, to whom I say, may I please speak to Jennifer, our mother, who has left us alone again. And a number we practiced for exactly this, I think, proud, and I, the oldest, age 6, calm, calmer than I am now, a mother who, alone with my baby, kills the lights, hides in the bathroom because someone is at the door and we must never answer the door. And I scream at my spouse because why the fuck are flowers arriving when I am home alone because I forget who I am or how old. And the chair we keep by the door for climbing, for bolting the chain, and the weight, the length of her shift, for the secret knock, a knock I now know everyone knows, and the diagnosis re-traumatized, and the infant lifted from my womb split open, and the stitches on my gut, and the stitches on my head, and the blood on my hand holding my child brain bits in, and the blood on the pads I filch from the hospital where our mother tells the doctor a lie to keep them from taking us away, and the hospital where, between contractions, they ask whether I feel safe at home, safe enough to take the baby back with me, and by instinct, I say yes, but for a second, I am tripped again, 6 again, and I am lying. I'll just read you 2 more poems. 1 year after my dying father and I stopped speaking to each other again. Someone on the internet is mourning her dad, that old goat with a gold mine of anecdotes. Scraps of fondness, I scrape off her tweet, his beef Wellington, her frogs. I want my frown-scored mouth loaded with her clean vocabulary of love, the way she holds her father's hand. No pinch of humiliation. Like the time I saw a teenager sitting on her father's lap. How I couldn't take my eyes off the alarming purity of it. How my mouth dried at the sight like I had been drinking the wrong water all this time. When I pull the ochreous leaves from my thirsty pothos, it is too easy, no satisfactory rip, too ready to let go. I covet the reels of the lucky ones going on about their dead. Everyone I have lost before the end. I will read one final poem. So during those 9 years between books, there was also a 3-year period when I was very depressed and I was not writing, I wasn't reading, I'd sort of cut myself off from my writing community. So I did what any poet would do. I subscribed to the Scientific American. And I was like, I need some fucking material. And years of subscriptions ended up in 2 poems. So I don't necessarily recommend that route. This is one of those poems, and it's called How the Dung Beetle Finds Its Way Home True story. It's from the Scientific American. The Milky Way's glinting ribbon helps the dung beetle roll his good ball of shit back to the ones he loves. But blind him to the sky with as little as a hat, and he will swerve like a drunk who, if he makes it home alive, might find the family soured with waiting, gone. Drawers cleared, beds cold, even the watercolor arc of giraffes and raptors pulled from the face of the fridge. See, I want to tell my missing father, it's a metaphor so simple it's almost not worth writing down. Even beetles need the stars to nudge them back to where they need to be when they need to be there, toward their little ones, gummy grins, ever pardoning the grisliest parent. I am 34 with a son the day my mother tells me she enrolled in a 4-day seminar about how to be a good mom. A little late, I know. Once, in a rage, I left my husband and our sleeping child. Where did you go? Friends ask when I tell the story. I wish I'd had a grander plan. I wish I'd stood on the roof of our building and empowered by that single Brooklyn star, I'd ripped up the book of my parents' sins. Or I wish I could tell someone the truth, that I fear I am the kind of woman who could leave the one good family God had the gall to give her. Really, I sat on the stairwell leading up to the roof and wept until a large bug threatened my life, at which point I recalled the dung beetles, stopped blaming my parents, and thanking the metaphorical stars, I rolled up my pile of shit and trudged back home. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your amazing poems. So we have about 12 minutes left. If anyone in the audience has any questions for our readers, you can either pop them in the chat or raise your hand and I can take your question. Or if you don't have any questions, that's okay too. I can ask one, but I give the audience first rights of refusal. So anyone have any questions for our audience? I'm sorry, for our readers. My gosh, I need more coffee. I'm clearly exhausted here. No? Okay, well, one question that I always like to ask is I'm just always so curious about how people approach their books. It's just something that fascinates me, and I know everybody has their own process. So I'll just ask this one question and then I'll let you go. But I'd like to hear from each of our featured readers how you approached compiling your book. And I know that might be a long answer for some of you, but I'm just really curious, like, how did you choose which poems to put in it? Were there any poems that you had originally that you took out? Anything that you might have added at the last minute? Your title. I just want to hear it all because I love this kind of stuff. And if you're not comfortable answering, you can just say pass, but I just love to hear people's process as it comes to compiling their manuscripts. You want to start, Suzanne? You're muted. There you go.
Sure, I love talking about process. It's one of my favorite things. I always like the discourse when it's on social media. Whipsaw was my previous book, Fixed Star, was very tightly organized and could be read as one long poem. And when I wrote Whipsaw, I tend to react to my last book and want to do something totally different. So Whipsaw is much more, it's loosely themed. It is a theme, but it's not as tightly wound as Fixed Star was. And it's more experimental. It has, Whipsaw was based on 2 crowns of sonnets and lyrics and prose poems. And this one has an erasure and an origin story, a speculative origin story. And it's a little bit looser and bigger. And so that's one thing that's very different. But I also I like my poems to speak to each other. I don't want to lose the reader completely. So all the poems do speak to each other. There's 5 sections. It did go through, it always goes, all the books often go through many different, iterations. Poems come in, poems go out. Oh, as soon as I send it in to publication, I write a better poem, you know, every time. So, it's like
Right.
it
Yeah.
would feel, fit better in the book. So ultimately, I just, I enjoy the process of putting, I know a lot of people don't like go a little bit crazy trying to put their books together, but I look at it as the last poem. I think Frost said that. So that's how I do it.
I love that. What about you, Lynn?
Um, I, uh, I was writing poetry until my junior year of college. And then I encountered the mean professor, and I decided I would show him. And I didn't write for 50 years. And then I started to write, and I realized I had 50 years of poems that just were stored up, and I couldn't stop writing. Um, I was fortunate, 1 year after I started writing, someone offered to publish a chapbook for me. And I worked with 3 other people who were also writing chapbooks. And so we sort of supported each other through the whole thing. We did all of the things that editors normally do, going through, and we did line editing, and we looked at, oh, this doesn't go with this. Someone told me to lay out all your poems and on the floor and walk around. That doesn't work if you have 3 cats, because they're like, um, but I agree with Suzanne. My poems talk to each other, and some of them get along really nicely, and they're very chatty with each other, and they don't get along with somebody else. So I put a spacer in there. And that's fun. It really, that's how I do it. I just figure out what goes with what, and and when I'm writing the poems, I don't think, oh, this is a companion piece to this one. It's just when I put them all together and start looking at them and what are they saying to each other, what's the common theme. And I have to, again, I agree with Suzanne. I don't like a book that is all the same, that sounds the same. I like different forms. I like different personas. I do a lot of ekphrastic writing. I like to play with things, and I feel like Houdini. It's like, okay, let me put myself in this knot and see how I get out of it. So yeah, and I think, my next book will be different from the first 2, and I look forward to that. That's how I do it.
Thank you. You make it sound so easy.
Oh yeah.
How about you, Eugenia?
So I guess I didn't really know what I was writing for a long time. And it wasn't until I had about 75-80% of a manuscript finished. And I had been toying with a lot of different ideas and had a lot of terrible titles. And then it suddenly occurred to me that the title of this book was Bianca. And Bianca is, well, in my 20s, before I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder and complex PTSD, I was very high functioning, working, going to school. But I was also managing my very mentally ill brain on my own and managing a lot of things on my own with ongoing active trauma happening in my life as well. And so I would abuse alcohol, abuse drugs, just be in a lot of toxic relationships and be this nightmare version of myself in the evenings when I was not having to be a high functioning member of a capitalistic society. And my friends began to call that nightmare version of me Bianca. And that was sort of my first experience in labeling this other part of my brain and giving this part of my brain a name, which in some ways helps us to then begin to address it. And once I figured out that this book was called Bianca, I it just came together in my mind. It suddenly cohered. And at one point, I thought this entire manuscript was going to be some like religious manifesto. Like I've had a lot of religious trauma in my life, and I thought that was going to be mostly poems in a plural we, kind of like talking about like the universality of like of faith and apostasy. How do you say that? It's one of those words I read and cannot say. But once I figured out it was actually about this narrative about having been mentally ill and having lived this traumatic childhood and now coming to terms as a person in my mid to late 30s with a lot more privilege, with the vocabulary to talk about some of that trauma, with the vocabulary to talk about my brain, then I recognized that there was actually a journey that I was trying to get across. And once that materialized in my mind, I remembered this essay that I'd written early on in while working on this manuscript, and it was about this one particular year when my brain was at its worst, and Bianca was at her best, and that poem found its home in the center of this collection. I had also been reading books that also were using a lot of hybrid forms, both poetry and essays in their collections. I was reading Toy Dericott's The Undertaker's Daughter and Tina Ching's Hybrida, both of which not only do this really well, but also talk about why putting an essay in a poetry collection is actually really revolutionary. Toy Dericott's collection begins with a poem that's called "I Am Not Afraid to Be Memoir." And I think I realized when I was putting this essay into this book that this was me saying, I'm not going to hide behind the idea that there's a speaker of these poems. The speaker of these poems is me. And I think that was really important for me to decide and to articulate, because I wanted this to be my way of destigmatizing mental illness and the conversation around mental illness. And then after that, I produced like a longer Zuihitsu that was about Bianca, and that's the only poem in which or only piece in which Bianca is named, and the book sort of really came together after that.
Wow. That's really fascinating. And I like what you said, especially about maybe not being afraid to add an essay or a different type of form to a book of poetry, because I mean, a lot of times I think these things can be, I mean, I don't want to get into a whole debate about what's poetry and what's not, but you know, there's definitely some room for some genre bending, I think. And just the first book that I published, Something Kindred, I decided actually to write it in a way where I had some prose and poetry in it. And at first, I didn't know for sure if the publisher was going to take it or not, but he did end up taking it, and it was a big relief to me that he allowed me to have both of those genres in that book, because I couldn't see it any other way. I felt like I had to have both prose and poetry to be able to tell the story. It just didn't feel right pure prose, and it didn't feel right pure poetry. So I don't mind when books have a little bit of variety like that. In fact, I welcome it. Okay, well, it's 7:59, so I'm going to end here so you all can get on with your evening. I really, really appreciate you all being here tonight. It was just an absolute pleasure and honor. I encourage everyone to support our poets and purchase their books if you have the means, or if you don't, order a copy maybe for your library of Whipsaw's Shoes for Lucy and Bianca. And I'm going to be downloading this from the cloud and uploading it. I'll share it on social media, so you can share it with your friends and your fans and your family, anyone else who missed it. I'm still working on the June reading. I'm not sure exactly who all the readers are going to be, but I'll be announcing that soon. It'll be a celebration of Poetry Month. I know we celebrate poetry every reading, but it'll be a Poetry Month specific. I might try to find some people who write poems about poems and, you know, that kind of fun stuff. So thank you all again so much for sharing this space. You are all a light, and it's a pleasure. Have a great night. Be well, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.